Hey there, thanks for joining us today. I am Kristen Foster, Deputy Director of Get Loud Arkansas, and I'm here with our favorite Senator, Joyce Elliott, for another episode of Speak Truth to Power with Joyce Elliott.
Yeah,
How
I
are
love
you?
that favorite senator part because, I did that for so long.
I know, right?
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to talk about whatever we're going to talk about today,
I know, you've always kind of been like, you don't have to call me Senator, you can just call me Joyce.
Yes.
And now I know it's even more official, but I still want to call you Senator. Like, it just feels like the right.
I tell people, wait, okay, I was born Joyce, not Senator. That's not part of my name, but it's okay, however we do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an eventful second week of session. Lots of bills getting filed.
Yeah.
One of the ones that really stood out to me was actually filed in the preliminary filing before they came in was SB 2. That was a bill that was filed by Senator Gilmore, who lives in Southeast Arkansas, represents several counties in Southeast Arkansas. He's from Crossett, I believe.
Yes.
And he filed a bill that it says that the title is the Truth in Sentencing and Parole Reform Act. But when you open it up, it just says the same thing again. There's really nothing there.
Yeah.
And so I thought for folks who may be concerned about that bill, it would be helpful to talk a little bit about what a shell bill is and why we see those.
Well, understandably, you would be confused if you opened a bill and there was nothing there except 2 or 3 lines. That is called a shell bill. And I think they filed that bill very early on. And when somebody does that, that means they have a plan of something they're going to work on, but they want the bill to be filed for notice that I'm going to file a bill, finish this out with whatever policies I want to see. In this case, policies dealing with criminal justice. So you can look for a bill, in this case, probably a rather large bill, because that's one of the common things people do when it's a rather large bill. There are several policies you want to put into one big piece. So we definitely need criminal justice reform. There's no question about it. But like anything else, it's always in the details. So when you see something like that filed this early, that means it's probably going to be pretty substantial and something you want to watch and pay attention to. And as always, if you're waiting for this and waiting to see what's going to happen, be in contact with your legislators after you read it, and do not be daunted or bothered by it being a long bill, because criminal justice is so important. I worked a lot on criminal justice when I was in the legislature, and there's a lot that needs to change in our state. For example, we tend to think that the longer the sentence is, number one, the more we are punishing somebody, but number two, we need to always remember it is supposed to be about reform. So you need to look for both those things. What's the punishment like? What's the reform? What's going to be different? And how is it going to be better for the people of Arkansas, not just that person, who is maybe serving time. So I am really looking forward to what's going to be in that bill, and everybody else should too. And let people know what you think once you see it.
Yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. There's a lot of those being filed for folks to keep an eye on. And we aren't really, we talked about this from the aspect of civic engagement, for people to be aware and to understand and be able to, meaningfully participate, not necessarily to tell people what they should believe, but just how you can take your beliefs and use them to make good change in your state, right?
That's right.
But this is something we're seeing a lot of this time that is kind of new for Arkansas, I think. I've never, in the years I've been involved, have never really heard the term omnibus bill used for a state legislature, action. It's always been, that's like a federal thing that happens, where you hear these huge bills that have all these different pieces in them, and they're really complicated. And, when I first started doing this kind of thing, I thought that's what the state legislature would be like too. I was really intimidated, and then I'd go and I'd be like, oh, well, some of these are just 1 page or 2 pages, they're not that hard. But now we're starting to see that kind of national use of these big packages starting to be something we're talking about here in Arkansas, especially with having Governor Huckabee Sanders in office, who is kind of bringing that DC mentality into our state politics. So we're seeing that with education, probably going to see it with criminal justice reform. What do you think folks need to know about these big legislative packages?
I think it can be very confusing, because generally If I had a bill that was about a certain thing, it was a bill to itself. And what people need to know is in these omnibus bills, there will be several ideas, several policy proposals in that one package. That's why it's called Omni. You might remember from high school that Omni means all. And so you can expect it to be a very large bill. An example of an omnibus bill in a lot of ways is not going to look the same now, I don't think, because this one is, I think, going to have teacher salaries in it, for example, along with all of the other policies. But the last time we changed the education, what we call the overall bill about how we measure schools and all of that, and the last time we changed that in 2017, I believe it was pretty much an omnibus bill. We had a very short time as legislators to get it read. So it was 101 bills, not 101 pages, I think I ended up having to read in a very short time.
Wow.
And if that had been broken up into pieces, you could understand why it would have been better to handle it that way, from my perspective anyway, because you're asking people to use their time where they have to live their lives and read something like this.
Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong with a bill that you don't have time to read?
That's exactly right. But I was always studious about it, and so I remember this was just an experience I had. I read that bill, I sat down, I read it, I had 19 questions that I needed to ask to get clarity. And I remember that on that bill, we had over the weekend, I think, to study it, and we went to committee on Monday or Wednesday, and I got to ask 3 of those questions. And somebody made a motion to adopt the bill, and that was it. So the whole point of that, if you have to spend a few hours, because you don't have that many in a day, to know what's in it and to register your thoughts, your concerns, be intimidated, that's fine, but do it and read the bill anyway, because there are going to be major changes, good or bad. I'm not making some kind of judgment about that. But that is going to be one that you want to take a look out for, the big omnibus bill in education.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've seen, sometimes in the national political scene that bills like this, they'll throw in good stuff and bad stuff to try to kind of, I don't want to say force, but kind of put some pressure that you don't want to vote against the good stuff that's in there, right? Even if you don't really support some of the other stuff. And so is that something you think we're going to see because of all the teacher pay issues that have gone on and the public pressure around that there's going to be kind of a, conglomerate of things?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. It will be that way because that's kind of one of the whole points of the omnibus bill. It's a process thing. You're not making a judgment about the bill, sitting here talking, but the process you need to know about. If maybe there is one thing, I don't know, say it's teacher salaries, that I really, really am for, but there is a whole deck of other issues that I think this cannot be good for Arkansas. So what it does, it puts people in a position of going, well, I know teachers really need a raise. If it's one that I think that's worthy, teachers need a raise. But these other 3 or 4 things in here are just going to be ruinous for education. And now you get squeezed, and what are you going to do? And so what I always had to do in situations like that is, all right, I know I really think this is good. This is not. Is this a situation where I can make the case that this 1 or 2 things are so important and rises to what it needs to, that I can live with these other issues that I think are things that will be ruinous to our state. And that's a decision you have to make. If it's something that, if I get the good thing I want, but it is going to be so compromised because of the other things over here that I think are going to be ruinous to our state, I'm likely to vote no. And everybody who wanted the teacher raise, and say in this case, because that's kind of one of the whole points. You voted against teacher raises. How could you? And if you voted for the other things, then people are going to go, vote against those. You don't like those. So I voted no on the bill. Then it's you voted against vouchers. You voted against charter schools. You know, that kind of thing. So that's one of the reasons I think it's from my perspective, it's not a good idea to have so many things wrapped up in a bill, because as much as you possibly can, it should be compartmentalized so people can make a good, clean decision that's not so wrapped up in everything else. And that is a common tactic in Washington. And one of the things I've always said, we should bring as little of Washington to Arkansas as we can.
Yeah.
So I really wish it were process-wise something that is more accessible for people to read and understand. Mm-hmm. Because the minute you understand one part of it, you read another page, and then there's a whole different subject. So you're switching the whole time.
Yeah, and you know, we've heard before people talk about like the one issue rule or whatever,
yes.
But that's not really, you know, meaning that like you should only have one issue in a piece of legislation. But
yes.
Is that something that's really enforced, or is it more of a suggestion?
It's more of a suggestion. You should try to, because you want the public to be able to understand what you're doing. And this won't be the first time there was an omnibus bill by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. But my thought, and maybe it's a teacher thing, mm-hmm. you know, as much as I possibly can, break things up into pieces so folks understand it, or you take time to have more of a discussion with the public so they understand all the pieces that are in it. But my thought is, people digest, especially things in writing these days, people digest all of these complex issues better when it's a one-by-one type thing, if at all possible. Because the other thing that happens a lot in Washington when it's an omnibus bill, and we've seen them all, Democrats and Republicans, when you discover down the road something that was in there that you had no idea was in there. Mm-hmm. Or you have so much verbiage that by the time somebody starts interpreting, I'm interpreting it one way, you're interpreting it that way. That's kind of what happens with these kind of bills. But invariably, yeah, something that you did not know was in there is what surprises you most in the end.
Right, and then we get to hear the refrain about unintended consequences when something
yes.
like that happens.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
And. Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I think sometimes folks view what's happening in the Arkansas legislature as being so similar to what's happening in Washington.
Yes. Because
they haven't had a chance to get her experience. You know, people will ask like, oh, well, don't the lawmakers have staff? They have all this staff, right? Yes. I mean, did you have just a ton of staff when you were in the legislature?
I would have people, especially people who don't work in government, would say, well, we need to meet, and I'll call your people, and we'll set up something. You're talking to my people, you're talking to me. And in many states, if I'm in another state, for example, I might have more than one staff person assigned just to my work. Mm-hmm. But in Arkansas, it's not that way. And so there is not somebody else reading the bill that's a staff person. That's mm-hmm. part of what they do to make sure your attention is called to these particular things they might see that I might miss. And it is a very, very good thing, because we usually file 2,000 or so pieces of legislation. And it is impossible to read every single piece of legislation by yourself, no matter how good your intentions are, because there are just not that many days in the year. And so I end up depending on, if you're in a committee, for instance, mm-hmm. Kristen, what's up with this bill? Let's talk about that. It would be really great if that were my staff person, mm-hmm. if I had somebody like that, and to respond to constituents as well. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't do that in Arkansas. And folks in many other states are just, what do you mean you don't have a staff person? Well, I didn't stutter, and that's just what I said, but they just can't believe it.
Well, I think even folks in Arkansas sometimes, like you see it on TV or on the news, like you think that it's going to be like, West Wing or something, yes. And it's so not. It's so not.
It's so not.
We have something I love though is that we have this part-time citizen legislature. So yes. It is English teachers and regular yes. farmers and just regular people. It's not all lawyers and
that's right.
people who've been in politics their whole lives. That's all they've ever wanted to do.
And that's a really good thing, because if we are to represent the people, we ought to have somebody that's representative of all types of situations in life as much as possible, and from all different kind of backgrounds, socioeconomic diversity. I think is really good in the legislature. So being a citizen legislature is a good thing, and sometimes I think because we get so rushed and so pushed, it's starting to feel and then we'll have a special session or we will extend a session. Like in 2021, it seemed that we would never go home,
Yes.
on and on.
Yes.
But in some states as well, people should know, folks they are full time. That is their job. If you're at the legislature, that's probably not the way you're making your living. Some people would say, except in certain instances. I get that.
Yep.
But,
except in certain instances. There's a little bit of that goes on.
Yeah.
But, okay, well, I really appreciate you taking time every week to kind of sit here and talk through some of this. We want folks to know what's going on. If you were talking to somebody who's this is their first time following it, first time trying to really plug into these issues, what would you suggest is kind of the easiest way to keep up with what's going on and to get in touch with their legislator?
Well, the easiest way, every legislator has an email account. They're on the public website, on the calendar page. You can find a list. It will say list of legislators, and if you were to come to my name, write by my name, it's going to be an envelope. All you have to do, you don't have to look up their email address. All you have to do is click on an envelope, and that goes right to that legislator. And unless somebody is lucky enough to have enough money to hire somebody to do that work for them, we don't have people. We get to open our own.
Yeah, you're
emails.
checking your own emails. It's going right to you.
So don't think it's going to somebody else. The other thing too, the telephone still works. The House and the Senate both have a telephone number, and they are on the web pages. And you call, you will get somebody, and they will ask, you may say, I want to speak to Senator, I want to send a message to Senator Elliott. It is a very good way to be in contact with people, because not everybody's sitting around on email and on, so I leave a message. It has to be a short message. They don't have all day to take my message because I'm outraged about something, and send it to your legislator. You may ask them to call you back. You might just leave some other message. But that is a really good thing. Whenever I went to my desk that morning or that afternoon, and I saw a whole stack of pink telephone messages, because it's hot pink. It looks like Pepto-Bismol on your desk. So it's noticeable, and legislators will see them. You should use that. And many times, some legislators have their cell phones posted and would prefer to get a call. Some would prefer to get a text. So you need to be aware of all of those. And a good thing to do is find out from your legislator what's the best way for me to contact you, because they should expect that you're going to be contacting them. And when you ask what's the best way, then you are saving time for you and that legislator too.
Yeah.
That way.
That's a great suggestion. I always tell people that, when you go in there, you just want to be aggressively friendly.
Yes.
Like I'm aggressively going to make you my friend. You get to know me. I'm going to be polite, but you just aren't going to be able to shake me if you're my legislator. You're going to know me,
One thing I always say to people who go to who are either calling or writing or whatever, one is, if it's a letter, make it as brief as you can, because just as surely as you sent the letter, somebody else probably sent a 6-page or two, and there is really not the time to read all that. So get your point down and make it as short as possible. Pretend you are doing a text where it's not going to be, 10 feet long.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, have a tone of voice maybe that is the way you prefer to be talked to. Because one of the mistakes people make, I always say, I get an email that starts out, how stupid are you? I think that's not quite the way to make, to get your point over. But legislators, no matter how much you think they're not, they're people, they have feelings too. And I think because now I'm not there, I'm just a regular citizen. We have a responsibility, I think, to help do something to tone down some of the rhetoric. But many times people are so angry, and I think people feel as if it's okay to say something to a legislator any kind of way, but it's not any more than, even when you're the most heated.
Yeah.
I would get really heated about something and wanted to go to the mic and just blast everything. Well, but I have to have that talk with myself. No, there's a better way to do this. Mm-hmm. And so that's why sometimes you see me stand at the mic and I would go quite slowly because I'm thinking there's a better way to say than what you're thinking is. And that's really important for communication, because you want it to be a communication back and forth. Mm-hmm. Don't cut it off before you even get a chance to grow a relationship. That's such good advice. Mm-hmm. I mean, you wouldn't go to a friend that you wanted to do something for you and talk to him that way. So even though it can be really hard, I know. I mean, trust me, I know it can be really hard. But and that's a great point about the 6-page letter, because they're going to be too busy reading omnibus bills. That's right. They won't have time. That's exactly right. What did you read, the omnibus bill, or did you read my 6-page letter? Exactly. You can't do both. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. Is there anything else you want to let folks know about this week, or make sure anybody's aware of before we wrap it up today? I want people to just be aware more than anything else. If you don't contact your legislator, they are going to assume you're perfectly fine with whatever they're doing. Don't just, if I'm your friend out there, don't just rattle away to me. Be sure folks know what your thinking is, and don't ever think that you don't have a right to be at that Capitol, because some people think they can't come to the Capitol. If you get a chance to be there and watch everything in person and talk with your legislator, or you could make an appointment with your legislator, at least try. So I just want you to remember how this is not a one-way thing, because the policies we get are about us out here in the public and the folks who are making the votes. And you should keep track of if people are doing what they said they were going to do, and even if that's the case, do you think that's good policy for the state? And let your voice be heard. And right now, if you are not a person who is registered to vote, because these same people will be up for election, at least all of the ones in the House and half of those in the Senate, there will be another election coming right up in 2024, and so you need to get loud, or whoever I would say get loud, because I know what I'm talking about and what we do. We do this work all year round. You need to get registered right now so you can start thinking about what you're going to do based on what happened in the session, because that's how it works. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can reach out to us at our website is getloudarkansas.org. You can email us at info@getloudarkansas.org, and all of our various socials are all Get Loud Arkansas. Yeah. And so, if you have something in particular you'd like us to cover, that'd be a good idea. Absolutely, yes. Send us topics and questions, and if you want to set up a voter registration drive where you live, we'll be glad to help you get that going. And I am so grateful to get to sit here and talk with you every week about this. We'll be back next Thursday with more. So please share this with your friends.